Hello everyone, this is Pal Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be talking about why this October is going to be turning much colder with some big changes ahead. So let's take a look at the overall water vapor imagery this morning on the North American view. You can actually see we can finally say goodbye to the remnants of what was Ian as kind of a tropical hybrid low that's been hanging off the Jersey Shore. That system is finally moving out into the open waters. We have been seeing some rain showers this morning into portions of New Mexico, but there's that first initial push of that colder air pushing into portions of North Dakota as well as Minnesota this morning. And the big change has been just the Siberian snowpack. And here's the latest update further north. And you can actually see here's the October 4th and now yesterday, October 5th, and noticeable the difference and to keep adding to that snowpack in Siberia. All that white shaded areas, that's where it hasn't filled in yet. But this is a pretty dramatic change, guys. This is about 90% snow cover, and this will have downward implications going forward for the month of October with this snowpack pretty much locked in place over Siberia now. So as we've been highlighting for the past couple of days, based upon that snowpack, that elevated snowpack, that has pushed some Arctic air. And this is the latest update from Anchorage, Alaska. And they are highlighting that first initial push of that Arctic air coming in from eastern Russia that will continue to push southbound and offer those big changes that are in store. So, and part of the reason is with that elevated snowpack up there, that's going to have a dramatic push in the overall jet stream. And that continues to push the much colder conditions going forward, especially for the eastern 2/3 of the US. So the latest update from the EPO, your Eastern Pacific Oscillation Guidance, whenever you see this negative, that gives you an indication of much colder air funneling into the region. So here's the first initial push that's moving into North Dakota this morning. And by the time we get into tomorrow, and especially around the 7th time frame, that should be locked over a good chunk of the upper Great Lakes, the upper Midwest, as well as portions of the Northeast with much colder conditions. And not only that, you can actually see this continues to remain negative for at least the next several weeks. And this isn't just the ensemble members of the European guidance. This is all the models coming together and saying, hey, that colder push in the eastern 2/3 of the US is going to be alive and prevalent going forward through October. So let's take you back at where we've been for the last 72 hours. And this was the remnants of Ian off the East Coast here. And they've been dealing with all that kind of a chillier rain and just the relentless flow as this kind of hybrid low has basically just been parked itself off the Jersey Shore. So this was your rainfall totals coming out of that system for the last 72 hours, as well as portions of the monsoonal flow into the deserts, into Arizona, and to New Mexico. And then some lighter amounts along the cold frontal boundary. This was the last 72 hours. So going forward, yeah, tomorrow you're going to wake up and feeling like winter in a big way with that first initial push of that much colder air we've been highlighting. And these are your temperatures, folks, and what it's going to feel like out there in portions of North Dakota. Widespread 20s, if not some teens, trying to even sneak into some single digits up there. So it's going to be a dramatic change as that colder push will push into South Dakota, start to feel like into portions of Nebraska here, as well as widespread 20s in Minnesota, Wisconsin, as well as into Michigan. That colder air will continue to push southbound, and by the time we wake up on Saturday, yeah, that is definitely a first initial shot of your coldest air of the season by far, with widespread 20s and a good chunk of Wisconsin here in Michigan and portions of Iowa, even some teens actually showing up. So it's going to be feeling a lot like winter in a big way, even down to Missouri and Illinois and parts of Indiana and Ohio, and even some of that colder shot will be seeing your first frost and freeze of the season, a good chunk of Kentucky as well as West Virginia. So this is a good initial shot of some much colder air funneling southbound. So as we move forward into next week, so now we're going to highlight this other feature that's coming out of Siberia, going through, bringing that Arctic air into Alaska, and then pushing, diving down the jet stream into the Pacific Northwest. And this will have an initial colder push of some much colder conditions and even some snow trying to fly in the backside of this in Idaho and portions of Montana. And this will continue southbound going into your Wednesday into Thursday of next week, with a good upper level low coming across the northwestern regions. And further to the south, notice the flow out of the southbound. That's going to help open the door of the Gulf of Mexico and bring some big changes ahead, and even talking rain in a good chunk of the central U.S., where much of Texas hasn't hardly seen anything in the last month. So that's definitely some big changes ahead, with the combination by the time we get into your Wednesday and Thursday timeframe. We talked about that system out in the Caribbean yesterday, highlighting that. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and watch that update at the end of this video. But by the time we get into Wednesday, that some of that remnants from that tropical system in the Caribbean may actually sneak into the Gulf of Mexico, back into the southern portions of the Bay of Campeche, combined with that upper level low that's going to be locked over portions of the west. That will help open up the door of the Gulf of Mexico and then pull in that tropical moisture back into Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, Louisiana. Those regions will start to see a dramatic change in the weather pattern. Some big changes where, again, some of these areas have not seen rain, hardly anything in the last month, as a continued drought remains in full effect. But by the time we get into the 13th through the 16th of the month, yeah, that's highlighting some heavier rains moving back into picture in a good chunk of Texas, into Oklahoma, back into Arkansas, as well as Louisiana. As up here in the Northeast, yes, that continued push with the negative EPO continued to dive down from the teleconnections. That puts another chillier rain back into the Northeast. So places like into portions of Maine, New Hampshire, back into Vermont, back into Connecticut, Massachusetts, into Rhode Island, those areas, into Jersey, into Delaware, you're going to be seeing some more chillier rains coming back in the picture from that 13th through the 15th of the month. So let's highlight the temperatures. So you have that first initial push of that, some of that much colder conditions. Some of this could be some snow flying into the upper elevations and bringing that much colder push, while much of the East Coast remains under that blanket of that colder air, and all those rain showers are going to keep the temperatures below average. But the big change is going to be highlighting over the middle of the country. This is going to be amplifying the monsoon again. I mean, the Four Corners region is going to be adding to those rainfall totals. But much of the midsection of the country, with the combination of that remnants of that tropical system in the Caribbean and the upper level low, this is all going to combine together to open up the Gulf of Mexico finally into Texas and to Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and that will actually push into Missouri and Illinois, where you've been seeing dry conditions as well. So this is going to be a welcome sight to see by the time we get into the middle to the end of next week, by the time we highlight the middle of the month. So, but again, that colder push continues to remain alive and prevalent, as we see another colder push sneaking back in to portions of the mid-Atlantic states by the time we get into the 14th to the 16th of the month. So those areas into the Ohio Valley, back into Kentucky again, through Virginia, through portions of Pennsylvania, we'll see much colder conditions moving back in, with another trough entering back into the picture. And look at that, guys. That's the 540 line. You haven't seen that in the Northeast since last winter, right? So that's indicative. Hey, 540 line's always a line to say, hey, well, it's basically cold enough that it could actually snow. I'm not talking snow in the Northeast, but it's still going to be cold enough. And that's a kind of a, if you're a snow lover, it's a kind of a welcome sight to see that moving back into the area. But to the north of there, I think we are going to be seeing some snow flying by then, by the time we get into next Friday, with that 540 line pushed all the way into Pennsylvania. So just on the south of there, that's the rain line. So we could be, look, another chillier rain along the East Coast there, highlighted around the 14th of the month. But yeah, there's the blue there showing up into portions of Canada where we could be talking about some snow, at least on the northern fringes of that 540 line. But underneath that, with that continued push of the EPO, that added snowpack in Siberia, it's a step down process, guys, and these are building blocks over time. So by the time we get into that 13th to the 20th of the month, a dramatic change is with that continued push of much colder conditions highlighting over the eastern 2/3 of the US. We'll see those colder air not just entering the upper Great Lakes and the Northeast and parts of the Ohio Valley. By the time we get past the middle of the month, now we're talking areas in the Southeast are going to be turning cooler, with the welcome sight to see even parts of Texas and Oklahoma where the first half of the month has been well above average. So by the time we get in that third week of October, yeah, we are highlighting, at least looking at some below average temperatures moving back into those areas, into parts of Texas and Louisiana and much of the deep south regions. And that just continues to remain for even as we extend through the 25th of the month, with that continued push and the teleconnections of the EPO continue to remain negative. That's going to keep the upper level low, the upper features of the continue to push further southbound. And now portions of the deep south, these areas will experiencing those cooler conditions even as far south as into Florida. So, but to the north of there, by the time we get into the last month of October, the latest update from the European ensembles of the EPS guidance does in fact keep continuing to push. Again, it's a step down process, folks, guys. So we could be even talking about for our first snows of the season by the time we get into that last week of October. So this is an initial change of why October is going to be a step down process and actually turning much colder the deeper we get into, especially for the eastern 2/3 of the US. So by the time we get into the last week of the month, yeah, some of the portions of the upper Midwest, the upper Great Lakes, portions of the Mid-Atlantic, as well as portions of the Northeast as in New England, but especially into Ontario and Quebec, we could be talking some snowflakes by then. So hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Catch the latest update, why I protect you before and after storm.